Hello, and welcome to 502 Conversations. I'm Brian Kirby, and my guest today is Dr. Joe Schwarcz, fondly referred to as Dr. Joe. Let me give you a proper bio here. Dr. Joe is director of the McGill Office for Science and Society, which aims to separate sense from nonsense. Dr. Joe holds a PhD in chemistry and is well known for his informative and entertaining public lectures on topics ranging from the chemistry of love to the science of aging. He has received numerous awards for teaching chemistry and interpreting science for the public, including the Order of Canada 2024, and he is the only non-American ever to win the American Chemical Society's prestigious Grady Stack Award for demystifying chemistry. This next fact is a shocker. He has hosted the Dr. Joe Show for 43 years on Montreal's CJAD radio, has appeared hundreds of times on TV, including on the Discovery Channel, CTV, CBC, TV Ontario, and Global Television. He also writes the newspaper column, The Right Chemistry, for the Montreal Gazette, and has authored 19 books, including bestsellers Radar, Hula Hoops, and Playful Pigs, An Apple a Day, and Quack, Quack, The Threat of Pseudoscience. His newest book, Better Not Burn Your Toast, The Science of Food and Health, is available right now. I will also add that, Dr. Joe, you are an amateur magician, and you often spice up your presentations with a little magic, and, like most magicians, you have a pronounced disdain for pseudoscience and charlatans, from psychics to so-called alternative health practitioners. Thank you so much for being here today. I greatly appreciate it.
For sure, Brian, thanks. And we're actually into the 45th year of radio.
Wow, even more impressive. Is it 19 books or is this your 20th?
It's 20, yeah.
So this is the 20th book. Okay. Time to update your bio. Well, that's true. You know, the last time we spoke was almost 2 years ago, so I should have done the math there. But all right. So The Science of Food and Health. I think, is this your third book on this topic, with the first two being?
Well, all the books have some articles about science, health, and food, because, of course, everyone is interested in eating. This is one thing that all humans have in common, right? We all eat, and we're all made of the food that we eat. The human body is just a very large chemical bag of substances that come from the food that we eat. So obviously, there's a link between food and health, and I like to explore that. And all of my books have some articles that refer to that. This one, I've used the theme of food and health, but I've tried to attack it from aspects of history and from modern science and from modern pseudoscience, and I try to give people a view into the food that we eat and the effect it has on our health, and how to separate some of the sense from the nonsense. And in all of my books, what I try to do is foster critical thinking. Try to instruct people on how to go about analyzing the scientific literature, how to look at media reports about the scientific literature, because there is a lot of confusion out there. And it's understandable, because information comes at us, like a tsunami every day. I mean, there are 5 scientific papers published every minute of every single day. So it's just an onslaught of information, unfortunately also of misinformation and disinformation. So we have a lot to deal with when we try to separate sense from nonsense.
I want to talk some specific topics from the book, because there are some that just popped out right at me. But before we do that, because you've mentioned fostering critical thinking, let's start with some definitions, or maybe some exposition of what nutrition science is right up front, so people understand what we're talking about. And I'll say, this is a topic I am super interested in, because, as you pointed out, it offers so much for education, right? So there's the opportunity to learn about and gain respect for the path of discovery of science. Also, how difficult it is, you said. And then how you kind of alluded to how bad actors can manipulate a tiny bit of truth into a massive disinformation campaign. And I'm kind of thinking of supplement proponents there. Also, how just simple ignorance can lead to bad intentions. I mean, how ignorance can lead good intentions to bad outcomes, like media headlines and these TV doctors that get a following. So, and let's not forget, smart people with multiple degrees, including medical doctors, can be fooled, right, by some of this stuff.
Absolutely. Having an advanced degree is not a vaccine against stupidity.
But nutrition science, it also carries some baggage, as you said, because it can be confusing and contradictory, because I think you were alluding, 1 year coffee might cause cancer, the next it doesn't because there's a benefit. 1 year alcohol is good for you in moderation, but no, wrong, abstinence is much better for you.
Problem is that it is very difficult to know anything with certainty. Science doesn't provide certainty. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unknown that comes with any kind of scientific research. And as time goes on and more studies come out, we refine our views. And that's certainly an acceptable methodology in science. And in fact, we should expect that as new information comes out, we change our mind. Sometimes I've had people come up to me after a public lecture, and this lady with gray hair come up to me and say, well, I had you as my prof 30 years ago, which already is, disturbing. And she says, well, I remember you telling us then that vitamin E was a viable supplement to take to reduce the risk of heart disease. And now you are saying that it doesn't really have any effect. And she said, you see, you guys, you scientists, one day you say this, next day you say that. So, how can we trust you? Well, first of all, I would say that a span of 30 years doesn't mean one day this, next day that. And I would be concerned if I were saying the same things now that I was saying 30 years ago, because it would mean that we haven't learned, that we haven't taken up any new information. And we have. In the area of supplements, there have been numerous studies published, and the original optimism has, in many cases, turned into pessimism because it was just not supported by the scientific facts. So in science, we do change our mind, and that should not be looked on as a negative. Whereas if you take a look at the quacks being people who claim to have knowledge that they don't actually have, they never change their mind. They're always singing the same tune. There's no evolution. If you look at sort of the stuff that was being said about homeopathy 200 years ago, is the same thing that homeopaths are promoting today, without any evolution of evidence, because of course they don't have any evidence for what they say. So it's part and parcel of science that we change our mind, we change our expectations, we change the advice that we give as science marches on.
For the public, and myself included in there, a lot of nutrition science, it also can be, we all suffer, well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us suffer from this myopic discounting, right? It's hard to think of something I do today having an effect 30 years from now, right? So that's the nature of these observational studies, right? They're over many years, hundreds of thousands of people sometime. So I can think that, a one cookie is not going to hurt me. Or, sure, I'll take some fat and sodium-laced gravy or something like that. I'll skip exercise today because we're on vacation. So it's hard to think, 30 years from now, what's the best thing to do? So what's your advice to an individual trying to make...
Oh, yes. Well, we have to gear ourselves to think like that, because what happens in the future, that is in our senior years, the foundations for that are laid much, much earlier. So it is very important to pay attention to nutrition and certainly to exercise habits early on in life. And, it's one of the reasons I enjoy teaching my students who are, in the 18 to 21 year age, because it is at that time you can really influence them and emphasize the importance of proper nutrition from that point on. Because, very often students at that age think, well, I'll worry about diseases, when I get older. Uh, but no, that's not the way things work. You have to build a solid foundation. Now, that being said, it is also true that it is not always easy to know how to build that solid foundation because nutritional studies are wrought with difficulties. Essentially, they are based on food frequency questionnaires that a set of the population fills out at one time. And then they are followed, hopefully for decades, because it takes a long time for diseases to evolve. And then we try to see what the outcome is relative to the diet that they've been eating. Now, there are difficulties with such observational long-term studies. One is that it is assumed that people's diet doesn't change significantly. That is, if they filled out food frequency questionnaires 30 years ago, it's kind of assumed that they have followed the same pattern of eating, which is not the case. Most of us change our pattern of eating as time goes on. The other problem is that when you fill out a food frequency questionnaire, very difficult to do because you have to remember exactly what you ate. Those are the kind of questions that are asked. What did you eat during the last week or during the last month? How many servings of oatmeal did you have during the last month? How many apples did you eat? How many bananas? It's very difficult to remember. It's also very difficult for people to quantify. When they're asked how many grams of red meat did you eat during the past week? Well, most people don't think in terms of weight. Now, some of these questionnaires are better because they will present pictures of food so that you can make a better judgment. But very unreliable, these food frequency questionnaires, especially because sometimes people will fill them out in terms of what they think they should have eaten instead of what they actually ate. There was a study that showed that on these food frequency questionnaires, people actually eat more broccoli than the world is capable of producing. So, but you hope that when you're looking at very large studies with thousands and thousands of people, then some of these things even out, and that you can rely on the information. But it always comes with a grain of salt. But this is, the only way that we can really do such studies, because doing the proper randomized controlled trials, which is really the gold standard of science, is almost impossible to do nutritionally. That is, if you want to find out what is the effect of, let's say, eating hamburgers as opposed to not eating hamburgers, or eating meat hamburgers as opposed to vegetarian hamburgers. Well, you'd have to have large groups of people being followed for decades, where the only difference between them is eating meat hamburger or vegetarian hamburger. It's almost impossible to do logistically or economically. So there is a lot of educated guesswork built into analyzing these nutritional studies. But there have been loads and loads of nutritional studies over the years. So we do have a pretty good sense. And the pretty good sense is that the closer we are to a plant-based diet, although I don't think it has to be exclusively that, the better off we are. That's what all of these studies kind of indicate. And of course, during the last few years, there's been a lot of attack on the ultra-processed foods, which I think is justified. Because we know that these are very high in sugar, high in salt, high in fat, and that they have a negative impact on our life. And interestingly enough, just this week, I think the US is going to come out with new diet recommendations. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because, of course, Kennedy has had a big impact on these recommendations, and his nutritional knowledge really can fit in the rear end of a flea. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with. I think they will talk about restricting ultra-processed foods, which is a good thing. But I'm not willing to give them free license about everything else that's been recommended, because it's, even a clock that doesn't work is right 2 times a day, and even a blind squirrel sometimes finds an acorn. So just because Kennedy may be right about ultra-processed foods does not excuse the nonsense that he's spreading about vaccines. So it's going to be interesting to see what recommendations they actually come out with. Hopefully they're not going to suggest, as Kennedy has suggested, that we should be eating beef tallow instead of vegetable fats. But we'll have to wait and see.
Let's hit some specifics from your book. Because a lot of your topics are just ripped from the headlines because people are confused. Because, of course, a little bit of information makes a great headline. So let's start with the title. So, better not burn your toast. Why not? By the way, great book cover.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I have to give credit to the designer, because we say don't judge a book by the cover, but the thing is, you sell a book by the cover.
Okay, so better not burn your toast. Why not?
All right, why not? High temperatures and food is a bad mix, because it generally creates substances that we know are potential carcinogens. And in this case, we're talking about a chemical called acrylamide, which the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, lists as a probable human carcinogen. Now, of course, there's a problematic word, probable. What does that really mean? Well, this information really comes from doing animal studies, and they are fed large doses of acrylamide, and that can trigger cancer. But, as we commonly say, the human is not a giant rat. So we have to be very careful about extrapolating from animal studies. But in any case, if something, even in large doses, is a carcinogen in animals, you want to be careful about intake. Now, it turns out that when you heat up any food that contains asparagine, which is a specific amino acid, and glucose, those two can react to form acrylamide. And this happens with heat. And when we look at bread, for example, it does contain amino acids, it does contain glucose, and you add some heat to it, you will form some acrylamide. But the question is the extent to which you heat the bread. And this is where don't burn your toast comes in. If you just heat it mildly to get the nice, sort of brownish color, you're fine. But if it starts to turn into charcoal, then you are certainly producing a significant amount of acrylamide. Now, eating burnt toast once in a while, of course, is not going to do harm, but it's not something that one should make a habit of. But the toast story is just one landmark for the acrylamide business, for the high risk of high temperature. Because the same thing goes for, grilling steaks or grilling hamburgers on the barbecue. When you have a very high temperature, you will form a number of potential carcinogens, not only acrylamide, but benzopyrene and numerous others. So as a general rule, it is better to cook at a low temperature. Cooking a stew with meat is generally healthier than frying or barbecuing. So there are these subtleties that one can make use of throughout one's life in terms of cooking. Yes, so the don't burn your toast is one way of emphasizing the problems with cooking at high temperatures.
So when you talk about acrylamide in mice and we're trying to extrapolate that to humans, that happens a lot, right? Where trying to figure out the human equivalency to a rodent potency, and they take these, maybe it's aspartame or whatever the ingredient is, they take a very fraction of that to make the limit for humans. Is that correct?
Yes. And, the problem is that you cannot do the human randomized control trial. You cannot take two groups of people, feed one of them acrylamide and keep the other free of acrylamide and see what happens. And furthermore, of course, you would have to do that for decades. Nobody thinks that eating a piece of burnt toast is going to instantly kill you. That's not the concern. The question would be, what if you eat burnt toast every day for 30 years? And that's where it comes down to making an educated guess based on large doses in animals over a short term. But just because something happens to a rat over a 2-year period when it is fed a high dose of a substance does not mean that we can easily extrapolate that to humans. On the other hand, it is a springboard for studies because, we can't do the randomized human controlled trials. So then we go with the observational trials, but what we want to observe are effects that we have potentially seen in animals. But there's a lot of guesswork that is involved. But eventually we come to some sort of general conclusion. As I said, that we should be eating a lot of plant foods, minimize cooking at high temperature, and lots of fruits and vegetables. That's where we find health.
This does come up in your book, which I also thought was great, was that, I don't know if it was about the acrylamide, but feeding these large doses to a rodent, so maybe 1 gram per kilogram of their weight, a human's not going to see that much, but it does tell IARC that, okay, this is a carcinogen, so it's a known hazard, but that's a difference than assigning the risk. And so when you say
Absolutely.
1 piece of burnt toast is probably...
Absolutely. One of the most important things to understand when confronting toxicology is that hazard and risk are not the same thing. Hazard is the innate potential of a substance or a process to cause disease or to cause cancer, whereas risk takes into account actual exposure. And that's very different. I mean, one analogy that I've often used, and I may have even used it when I spoke to you before, is a grizzly bear. I mean, a grizzly bear, of course, is a recognized hazard. It's a very dangerous animal. One swipe of its paw can take off a human head. If you watch a grizzly bear in a zoo, where it's in a cage or behind a fence, your risk is minimal. The hazard is still there. That animal still has the potential to do harm. Now, if you're out in the wild and you see a grizzly bear approaching, you better start running fast, or at least faster than one of your friends, because now there's a real risk. The hazard hasn't changed, but the risk has. And this is why when we are looking at things like, nitrates or nitrites or acrylamide or benzopyrene or any carcinogen, we have to differentiate between hazard and risk. What we are really interested in is evaluating risk. That is, how much of a substance we are exposed to relative to what is known to actually be a problem. And, this is a question of interpretation because, as I keep saying, you cannot do the gold standard, the randomized controlled trial in humans, because you cannot ethically expose humans to possible dangerous substances.
All right. This next section in your book, this made huge headlines, and it wasn't very long ago. Time-restricted eating. Tons of newspaper articles, I think 3 or 4 papers I read on this, with different restrictions on the timing and all kinds of different things. So time-restricted eating. So that's the key to weight control and long life. Or is it?
Well, one thing to really understand is that if you scour the scientific literature, you will find studies about any topic that go in either direction. You will have opposing views. You can find a study that tells you that tomatoes prevent cancer, and studies that show you that eating tomatoes causes cancer. Usually they refer to pesticides on the tomatoes as the causative agent, and naturally occurring compounds in tomatoes like carotenoids and lycopene as being the preventive. But you can find a study to back up whatever you view you may have. So that's why what we tend to look at is consensus. You look at all of the studies that you can get your hands on and see what the drift is. And when you see that 95% of the studies go in one direction, only 5% go in the other direction, then you think that you're on the right track. And there is information on both sides all the time. If you look at climate change, you will find papers on both sides. But the fact is that 97% of climate scientists agree that humans are involved in climate change, even though the other 3% may be very vocal and may sound very legitimate. But we go by consensus. And that's the same thing that we do in nutritional research. And whatever topic we look at the scientific literature and we see where it leads by consensus. But, we have to be careful about being dogmatic and saying that, well, if new information comes out, we will change our mind about it. And, this applies to almost any of the topics that we discuss here. Science is fluid and opinions change as new data accumulates. And as you mentioned, I mean, we have studies coming out, all the time about artificial sweeteners, about whether coffee is good for us or not, whether or not there's such a thing as nature's Ozempic. I mean, these are all, these are the kind of issues that I deal with in the book, because you can present both sides and then guide people towards forming a legitimate opinion. Which was the one that you were specifically asking about?
Actually, we'll loop them together. So I was asking about time-restricted eating. So that made a lot of...
time-restricted eating. Okay. Now, again, you will find studies, all over about this. Most of the studies show that people who will restrict their eating to about 8 hours, usually from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that they will lose weight. Now, the question is why? I think the simple answer is that by restricting the time frame, you are automatically restricting the calories that you will take in. Most of the calories, the excess calories that people consume come from nighttime snacking. You're watching TV there and, you think, well, you'll have a couple of potato chips, but, who can have just a couple? So you end up consuming half a bag, or you're eating the popcorn that has been fried and is high in salt, or, you may go for that extra piece of cheese, when you want to snack. So I think by restricting the time that you're eating, you automatically restrict your caloric intake. But the problem with all of these regimens, whatever kind of diet you're looking at, is that it is virtually impossible to keep it up. Yeah, people will start with this restricted eating, and for maybe a few months they can do the 8 to 4 thing, but then it just, it fades away because it just is not conducive to their lifestyle, and we see this over and over again. No matter what diet people follow, it can work for a year, and after that, it stops working. And this is something that is, well documented. And these diets, whether it's taking specific supplements or whether it's time-restricted eating, all work for a short time because in some way they will all restrict caloric intake. And, you can't fool thermodynamics. And it basically comes down to calories in and calories out. Now, there are some subtleties involved with that, but still that is the basic rule. And the laws of thermodynamics will never be revoked. So if you want to lose weight, it has to come with deficiency in calories. And but that can be accomplished in different ways. So one can manipulate the protein, carbohydrate, and fat in our diet in a favorable way. But still, the bottom line is, if you want to lose weight, you have to expend more calories than you take in.
Speaking of that, I mean, we might as well roll right into this one because you mentioned it a couple of minutes ago. So obesity, I mean, it's a huge problem in the U.S. I don't know about Canada, but we know it's a risk because it's associated with a lot of bad outcomes from cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and all that stuff. Some of the weight loss drugs, they can cost, like $1,000 a month. And you mentioned nature's Ozempic, berberine, as it's known.
Berberine, yeah.
And I mean, it's on the what's the
Yeah,
dope? Oh, sorry. So what is
yeah,
the story with berberine? Because it's all over the internet, which is always
right.
correct.
Well, before we get to berberine, let's just talk about these drugs, these GLP-1
Okay.
agonists, because the headlines about them every day, virtually, especially in fact this week, because Wegovy is going to come out in a pill form, which is much more acceptable to people, I think, than taking a weekly injection. And there's a lot of what I can tell you, brilliant science behind that pill on how they have managed to do this, because uh, the active ingredient is a peptide, a string of amino acids, and it's very difficult to keep that from being digested. That's the reason that it has to be injected, right? So that it's not open to interaction with enzymes and digestive tract. But they have managed in the pill form to add an ingredient to the pill that prevents it from being in contact with the enzymes. Anyway, it's really very clever chemistry there. And these pills work and the injections work. I mean, there's no question about the GLP-1 agonist working. They don't work without any side effect. I mean, some people can have terrible side effect, gastrointestinal problems, sometimes gastric paralysis, which can be a very dangerous situation. But by and large, they do help people lose weight, significant amounts of weight. But the fact is that you have to keep using these drugs for the rest of your life. As soon as you go off, the weight will come back. Now, because of the success of these drugs, of course, supplement manufacturers have come out with all kinds of supplements that they say can mimic the effects of Ozempic, and berberine, which is a plant extract, is one of these. This is all hype. It has nothing to do with the mechanism of GLP-1 agonists. Uh, this is purely marketing. There's zero evidence that berberine has any kind of effect like Ozempic. But this is what we see in the supplement industry. Whenever there is something that has been shown to work scientifically, they will try to jump on the bandwagon. And the problem with these supplements is that the requirements for marketing are absolutely nil. Um, you don't have to prove efficacy. Basically, if it's something that has been shown to be safe, which berberine is, you can market it and make these outrageous claims as long as you don't make the claim on the bottle itself. But in the accompanying literature or on websites, you can make all these claims. So the supplement industry, which of course is a huge industry, multi-billion-dollar industry, there are 100,000 dietary supplements available in North America. I mean, it's a mind-boggling number. Most of them are totally useless. And I think berberine falls into that category. There's just a lot of hype, and they're trying to ride the coattails of Ozempic.
Moving from hype to a dark side of chemistry, well, I guess that's not right. It's just a bad use of it. So this should be, I'll call it Chemistry 101 because even I know about this, but it's truly astounding topic because it comes up again and again. And it's not good nutrition. You write about diethylene glycol, which this has I'm very surprised that this has a bad habit of making headlines when people that are using it should know better because they're chemists and pharmaceutical companies. So, we saw diethylene glycol deaths in contaminated cough syrup just a couple of months ago. 19 deaths. In 2023, deaths from it. 2022, 2018. It's been known for years that this is a deadly chemical. What is going on with cough syrup?
Well, yeah, and let's get one thing straight here. Diethylene glycol is never legitimately added to a product. It is always used in an illegitimate fashion. Now, diethylene glycol has a very interesting history. Because it was first used as a solvent back in the 1930s for a new drug, sulfanilamide, which was one of the first drugs ever used to treat strep throat in children. In Europe, it was available as a pill, and it was very effective. But in the United States, children were accustomed to using elixirs, that is, liquid versions of medications, which are, mothers found were easier to give to kids than the pill form. So a company that wanted to market sulfonylurea in the US decided they were going to make a liquid version of it, which means that they had to find a solvent in which the drug would dissolve. And this job was given to a chemist and at the messenger company, which is going to produce this. And in those days, there were very few regulations. So he just went through his lab and he tried different substances. It didn't dissolve in water. It didn't dissolve in alcohol. He tried ethylene glycol and he tasted it. It tasted sweet. So he thought it was great. It dissolved the active ingredient and it went on the market. And pretty soon, of course, there were reports of all kinds of toxic reactions in children. The FDA began a recall of this, which turned out to be extremely successful. They were able to recall almost all of this product that had been sold to pharmacies. But nevertheless, there were 130 people who died because of this. So it became clear that diethylene glycol was a very toxic substance. However, it works very well as a solvent for cough medicines. It tastes sweet. It dissolves the active ingredient. So we still have some illegally manufactured, usually in China or in Korea, that have found their way into the marketplace and have resulted in toxic reactions. But diethylene glycol is never, ever legally added to any kind of drug. But it's an interesting story. It also introduces this idea of medicines that are formulated with substances that are unsafe and copycat medicines. There are a lot of medicines that are illegally produced, mostly in Asia, that use questionable ingredients or have no ingredients at all. For example, there were malaria medications that were sold in Africa that contained no active ingredient whatsoever. So, there's a lot of criminal activity in the illegitimate pharmaceutical business.
All right, I have two questions left for you. One's personal, but the other one is, so you've talked about questionable things and supplements and taking a tiny bit of truth, but it's even faster just to make up some kind of nonsense. So I read this in your book, Body Frequencies, and how lower frequencies can cause specific disease, but you can ameliorate it with this proprietary technology. I mean, come on, what's the science behind body frequencies?
Sometimes what is really amazing to me is that people actually buy into this stuff and believe it. Because nonsense can be made to sound very, very seductive. You just throw in some scientific sounding terms. And I think what you're referring to is the use of certain what they call essential oils, which are, extracted from plants that they claim have some natural frequencies that can match the appropriate frequency of the human body or negate sick frequencies. I mean, it is absolute nonsense. The human body does not have any frequencies. Frequency is just a measure of how many times a second something occurs. We don't have any natural vibrations in the body that can prevent disease or cause disease. It's just a totally illegitimate idea. But quackery has a long history. There were machines that were produced in the late 1800s when electricity first, became a novel item. They thought that, this was the answer to everything. And they had machines that had some sort of electronic component that they said would irradiate the body with frequencies that would heal. Today, they still sell stuff like that. You can buy machines on the internet that claim to be able to be tuned to the frequency of some disease in the body and to negate that frequency. It is just so absurd that it's hard to even find the words to describe it. But I've tried to find the words in some of the articles, in this book to try to explain to people why this is just scientifically absurd.
But they speak with such certainty and tell such great stories. I mean, that's
It is. Well, sometimes repetition make something true just by repeating. This was the Nazi philosophy. This is what Goebbels, that was his philosophy. You say something often enough, and it becomes true. And unfortunately, we're seeing this now in your country. We're seeing it from President Trump, saying nonsense over and over and over again. And because it is said so frequently, people start believing that it is true. And we see this in science all the time. And, you just throw in some of these scientific sounding terms, and people who have no background in science cannot really discern whether it's meaningful or not. And you hear it often enough. You say, well, yeah, maybe there is something to that. Well, there usually isn't.
I was going to ask you, as I was writing up my questions, I wanted to ask you about King Charles and the homeopath, but then I realized I don't really have a leg to stand on because it's worse here, right? So we've got like a germ theory denialist, basically, at the head of HSS, and then we've got a Reiki somebody that believes that you can heal bodies remotely as CMS and all kinds. I mean, so I can't really ask that question about the homeopath. So what he did was mild compared to what I'm living through.
Absolutely. I mean, we have never seen quackery to the extent that we see it today, because it's aided and abetted by the internet, by TikTok, and Instagram and all of this, because it is so easy in a minute and a half on Instagram or TikTok to come up with some pseudoscientific garbled nonsense that sounds believable. And these days, this is where people get their information. They get their information from the internet or from various social media outlets. And while the internet can be wonderful because it also furnishes us with great legitimate information, but you have to know how to filter. You have to know which are the reliable sites and which are not. And generally, something that sounds too good to be true is too good to be true. There are no simple solutions to complex problems. There's no simple supplement that will make you live forever. The best thing you can do is exercise and eat right. Well, we can tell people how to eat right. Unfortunately, you can't put exercise in a bottle. You actually have to do it. And people don't. Even those who know that they should, they still don't. Humans are a strange species.
Well, again, it's the myopic discounting, You get into the habit of skipping it a day, and then that turns into another day, and 30 years go by, and all of a sudden you're 50 pounds heavier with a blocked artery. I mean, that's what happens. So let me ask a personal question now. So last time I asked about tea, okay? This time I probably could have looked this up, and I know you have the book A Grain of Salt, but I want to ask about salt because it's got to have some interesting chemistry because it's so diverse. So it's a flavoring, right? But on my boat, it can create a battery effect between dissimilar metals and cause corrosion, right? It's
right. It's also a wonderful preservative.
It's a preservative. My wife uses kosher salt to make gravlax. So you put some salt on salmon and you press it, and it makes a preservative. It's also we put it on roads to melt, but it corrodes cars. So flavor, corrosive, conductor.
Actually, before refrigeration, the way to preserve meat was to salt it.
So what makes salt so?
It works. All right. It's salt, of course, is a double-edged sword. We need some sodium chloride in our body because it controls the way that our nervous system works, the way that information gets transmitted in nerves. It controls the way that nutrients are absorbed into cells. It controls the amount of water that the body retains. So there's no question that sodium is important. However, too much is where the problem lies, because when you consume too much sodium, the body retains more liquid, more water, and that increases blood pressure. Blood pressure, of course, is what we refer to as a silent killer, because you don't know that you have it. It doesn't have any overt symptoms until eventually, it triggers a heart attack or triggers a stroke. There's no question that limiting the amount of salt in the diet reduces the risk of heart disease and stroke. This is beyond any kind of question. Now, numbers, of course, matter in science. Numbers are the currency of science. So the question is, how much should we be consuming and what is too much? Well, I can give you the ballpark figure. 1 teaspoon of salt, sodium chloride, is what we should, the maximum that we should be taking in every day. And most of that is found in processed foods. The amount of salt that we add at the dinner table to food that you've cooked at home is a very small fraction of our total sodium intake. It comes from processed foods. Now, 1 teaspoon of salt is about 5 to 6 grams. It is very easy to exceed that. We know that in North America, the average intake is in the ballpark of 8 to 10 grams a day, which is way, way too much. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why we see a virtual epidemic of heart disease and hypertension. And salt is everywhere. If you have just a slice of pizza, that will have about 1.5 to 2 grams. That's a third of your daily intake. And whoever has only one slice of pizza, you have 2 slices of pizza, right? You're almost at your daily intake. And this is one of the big problems with the ultra processed foods, that they contain a huge amount of salt. But salt is what makes food taste good, and this is the issue here, is that the reason that they add so much extra salt is because that's what keeps people coming back, because that's what makes the food taste good. But I think this is one of the most important things to pay attention to, is the amount of salt in the diet. And it's pretty easy to pay attention to it because, you can download a table which will give you a very good indication of where salt is found. And you can use that as a guide. And, people don't realize that even things like bread contain significant amount of salt. I mean, of course, they know that potato chips are high in salt, but they don't think that bread is. And yet it is. You cannot tell only by the taste. Bread naturally has a lot of sugars, glucose in it, and starch, which gives it a sweet taste. You don't notice the amount of salt that is in there. So one really has to look at numbers when it comes to salt. And although the usual guideline is 5 to 6 grams or 1 teaspoon, I think that's too much. I think we should be shooting for at most 3 to 4 grams of salt a day. That will dramatically decrease the blood pressure in the general population and result in a decrease in heart attacks and strokes.
You probably can't explain this part to me in a short time, but so what makes it a battery? So I can put stainless steel and bronze in salt water, and the stainless starts eating up the bronze, but not in fresh water.
Right. Because in order to have electric current flow through water, you need what we call electrolytes. You need some ions dissolved in the water. Whether it's sodium chloride or potassium chloride or potassium nitrate, it doesn't matter. You just need some ionic strength. Now, the reason that your car corrodes is because salt is put on the streets, right? Well, I don't know where you are, but here certainly they put a lot of salt on the street. So you get a lot of salty water on your car. And because you have different metals in your car, current will run from one metal to the next when you have electrolyte in between them. And salt is just an excellent electrolyte. But in that context, it has nothing to do with what it is doing in the body. It's totally different chemistry.
It's just such an interesting thing, salt, that does all these things. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, but it's not unique like that. I mean, most medicines are like that. I mean, you look at something like morphine, which is a wonderful painkiller, but in slightly higher dose, it can kill you. So that's why we always have to look at details. You have to look at numbers. Numbers, as I mentioned, is the currency of science. Everything revolves around numbers. And, the Paracelsus laid the cornerstone of toxicology 500 years ago when he said only the dose makes the poison. And, we have to be aware of that in the context of everything that we've talked about here. A little bit of something may be beneficial, more is not good.
Okay, Dr. Joe, thank you so much. Dozens of books, 20 now, 20 books,
20,
thousands of online articles. You can go to,
20 number 21 is with the publisher.
no, wow.
Should be out in the spring.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. All right, well, better not burn your toast. The Science of Food and Health, it's available right now, so you can get that. I don't know how many chapters, from aspartame to yerba mate, A to Y. I guess there's nothing with C.
The way that I try to design this is that each of the chapters is independent. So, you can pick up the book, open it anywhere, and spend, the 10 minutes or whatever it takes to read one chapter. And the next time you go to the bathroom, you can open it up another place and read something else. And before you know it, you've been educated on a whole slew of subjects.
Yeah, I actually did use the index that way, aspartame or berberine, or you can just give 'em acrylamide, just find it and go right to it. So, and all your books are like that, so I do appreciate that. And I have several of them, I must say. Hopefully, one of these days I'll see you in person. I'll get you to sign one. So, will you be at SciCon 2026 in Buffalo? It's right near you, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe. Yeah, I may go to that one. I tell you honestly, it was a lot more attractive to go to Vegas when it was there than to Buffalo.
God,
But,
I hate Vegas. So,
really? No, I love the shows there.
oh, well, that's a different thing. There is this carnival atmosphere just to being on the street, and the people and the noise, and yeah, that's true.
Oh, it's a unique place. There's no other place in the world like it. But neither is there a place where you can have entertainment, as concentrated as there and such high quality.
Yes, but on the topic of food and nutrition, I can't think of a worse place to spend, 3 or 4 days trying to eat healthy.
Absolutely. It is fast food mecca.
Dr. Joe, thank you so much for being here. I
Thank
greatly
you.
appreciate it. And when your next book comes out, maybe we'll speak again.
Thanks very much.